Ladies and gentlemen, you ever hear someone say, I gave him everything and it still wasn't enough? You know that pain. It's sharp. It cuts deeper than any blade. But let me tell you something, this ain't about fault. It's about understanding. See, love is a powerful force, but too much of anything, even love, can feel like a weight pressing down on a man's chest. And some of you are wondering right now, why does it happen? Why do men leave when all we're trying to do is love them right? You stayed up at night asking yourself that, didn't you? I'll tell you why, because caring isn't the same as connecting. Loving someone doesn't always mean you're speaking their language. You love someone deeply, and naturally you want to show it. You do everything in your power to make their life easier, to fill it with joy and comfort. You care about their needs, their dreams, their happiness. But sometimes, despite all your good intentions, something shifts. The very care you offer, the love you pour out, becomes the reason they start to pull away. This is the paradox of care. How can something as pure as love, as essential as care, drive someone away? To understand this, we have to look deeper into human nature, especially the way men experience relationships and emotional freedom. At the heart of it lies a conflict that many don't even realize exists. Men often equate love with freedom, not just freedom from loneliness or hardship, but the freedom to be themselves, to make decisions, to grow on their own terms. When that sense of freedom starts to feel threatened, even unintentionally, they feel the need to break free. And the irony? This happens most often when they are with someone who cares deeply about them. Think about it like this: when you care about someone, you naturally want to help them, to guide them, to protect them from pain. You might step in to solve problems, anticipate their needs, or take on responsibilities to lighten their load. And all of this comes from a good place. But on the receiving end, it can start to feel overwhelming. A man might feel like he's no longer driving his own life, even if the care you're providing is meant to support him. This isn't about blame. It's about perspective. Imagine a bird with perfectly functional wings. If someone builds a cage around it, even if that cage is made of gold, the bird doesn't see luxury, it sees limitation. The bird might start to believe it can no longer fly, even though the cage was built with love. That's how men often feel when care becomes all-encompassing. It can unintentionally clip their wings, making them question their independence and identity. Care, in its most genuine form, is about seeing the person you love and meeting them where they are not where you think they should be. But that's where things get tricky. Often when someone cares deeply, they begin to project their own understanding of happiness onto their partner. You might think, if I do this for him, he'll be happy. If I fix this problem, he'll love me more. If I give him everything, he'll never leave. But for the man on the receiving end, it can feel like he's being shaped into someone else's version of himself. Men are wired through biology, through culture, through upbringing to value autonomy. This isn't to say that men don't want love or support. They do. But they also want to feel capable of navigating their own lives. They want to feel like they're the ones building their path, even if it's messy or uncertain. And when someone, even someone they love deeply, starts to overstep into that space, it can create a tension they don't know how to articulate. Here's another layer to this paradox. When men leave women who care about them, they're not rejecting the care itself. They're rejecting the way that care makes them feel about themselves. It's not about what you're doing, it's about what they think they're losing. Independence, confidence, a sense of control, the ability to prove to themselves that they can stand tall. This isn't to say that men don't want or need care in their lives. The difference lies in how that care is delivered. Care should feel like an open hand, not a closed fist. It should empower, not overshadow. The most meaningful care gives someone the room to breathe, to falter, to grow, and to know that they are loved even when they stumble. It's the smallest gestures that matter most. Listening without judgment, supporting without solving, encouraging without directing. These are the kinds of care that men often respond to, not because they don't appreciate grand gestures, but because these actions allow them to retain their sense of self while feeling loved. But when care crosses the line into control, even in subtle ways, it triggers something primal. Men start to feel suffocated, like they're losing their voice in their own lives. They might not even understand why they're pulling away. They just know they feel the need to escape. The paradox of care is a delicate balance. It's not about doing less or withholding love. It's about loving in a way that builds someone up without boxing them in. It's about showing you care without taking away the freedom they need to feel whole. And sometimes the hardest part of love is learning to let go just enough to let the one you love come closer on their own terms. Because when care feels like freedom, that's when it becomes unbreakable. Understanding emotional needs in a relationship is like learning a new language. You might think you're saying all the right things, doing all the right actions, but if the other person doesn't feel understood, your efforts can miss the mark entirely. Men, in particular, often operate in a world where their emotional needs are complex and, more importantly, unspoken. They rarely articulate what they truly need, sometimes because they don't know how, and other times because they fear it will make them seem weak or burdensome. This gap between what they need and what they receive is often why they pull away even from someone who cares deeply about them. Many women believe that showing care means giving everything they have: time, attention, energy, and love. They'll go above and beyond, thinking that their selflessness will make their partner feel valued and loved. But for men, care doesn't always translate in the same way. While they appreciate the effort, it's not just about the actions, it's about how those actions align with their deeper emotional needs. When a man feels cared for in a way that doesn't resonate with his emotional language, he can feel misunderstood, even alienated. And misunderstanding in emotional terms can often feel worse than not being cared for at all. Men often have a fundamental need to feel respected and valued for who they are, not just for what they do. This respect is deeply tied to their sense of identity. When they feel seen for their strengths and appreciated for their efforts, they thrive emotionally. However, when care comes across as overcompensating, overly critical, or as an attempt to fix them, it can strike a nerve. Instead of feeling loved, they might feel inadequate. Instead of feeling supported, they might feel controlled. And in these moments, they start to question whether they are truly being loved for who they are or for what they could be if they changed. This disconnect often arises because men and women express care differently. Women may express care through acts of service, thoughtful gestures, or by taking on the emotional labor of the relationship. These actions are deeply meaningful to them, but men might not interpret them the same way. For instance, if a woman is constantly trying to solve a man's problems, whether it's career struggles, personal frustrations, or emotional insecurities, he might feel that his ability to handle those issues on his own is being doubted. It's not that he doesn't appreciate the help, it's that he wants to feel capable and competent in his own right. Men, on the other hand, often express their emotional needs indirectly. They might not say, "I need to feel trusted," but they'll withdraw when they feel micromanaged. They might not say, "I need space to figure this out on my own," but they'll grow distant when they feel smothered. Their emotional needs are tied closely to autonomy, respect, and the feeling that they are contributing something meaningful to the relationship. When those needs aren't met despite the care they're receiving, it creates a gap that can push them away. A critical element of this dynamic is how men perceive vulnerability. Society has long conditioned men to suppress their emotions, to be the strong, stoic provider who doesn't falter. This conditioning doesn't vanish just because they're in a relationship. Even if they trust their partner, many men struggle to open up about their emotional needs. They fear being judged or misunderstood, so they keep their feelings to themselves. And when those unspoken needs go unmet, resentment or distance can build. A man might crave validation and affirmation. He might need to hear that he's doing a good job, that his efforts are noticed, that his presence makes a difference. But if those words aren't spoken because his partner assumes he already knows how she feels, he might start to feel invisible. Similarly, he might need space to decompress after a long day, but if his partner interprets his silence as disinterest, she might try harder to engage him, inadvertently adding pressure instead of offering relief. Understanding a man's emotional needs requires patience and observation. It's not about guessing or assuming, it's about listening, truly listening to what he says, and just as importantly, what he doesn't say. It's about noticing the moments when he seems most at ease, most confident, most alive, and understanding what made him feel that way. When a man feels that his emotional needs are understood and honored, he doesn't just feel loved, he feels secure. He feels like he can show up as his full self without fear of judgment or rejection. And when he has that security, he doesn't need to run or withdraw. He stays because he knows he's not just loved, he's understood. The real key is recognizing that care isn't one size fits all. It's not about doing more, it's about doing what matters most. It's about learning his emotional language and meeting him where he is, not where you think he should be. That's how you bridge the gap, how you turn care into connection, and how you create a love that feels unshakable. One of the most subtle yet powerful forces in any relationship is the invisible weight of unspoken expectations. In the realm of love, both partners often enter the relationship with hopes and desires, conscious or unconscious, about how things should unfold. The challenge arises when these expectations aren't communicated clearly or when they go unmet. In many cases, men leave relationships not because of a lack of love or care, but because the expectations placed upon them both by themselves and their partner become too heavy to bear. In relationships where a woman deeply cares for a man, her expectations can sometimes be overwhelming without her even realizing it. She might assume that her partner will step up in the same way she would, or that he'll understand her needs without them needing to be spelled out. She may expect him to be more emotionally available, more engaged in the relationship, or to meet her emotional needs in ways she values most. But when those expectations are not met, frustration builds. What's worse is that the man, in trying to meet those expectations, may feel like he's constantly falling short. No matter what he does, it's never enough. That feeling of inadequacy can be crushing, especially when it comes from someone he cares about deeply. The crux of this issue lies in the fact that expectations are often set without discussion. They're assumed, internalized, and sometimes built upon past experiences, but they're rarely spoken aloud. So, the woman might be waiting for a certain gesture or response, believing that her care is being reciprocated in the right way, while the man might not even be aware that there's a need for change. This mismatch creates a silent distance. He may start to feel like he's failing, not because he doesn't want to fulfill her needs, but because he doesn't even understand what those needs truly are. This misunderstanding often leads to a dynamic where he becomes more withdrawn. He doesn't know how to please her because he's unsure what she actually expects from him. Maybe he's been trying to provide in ways that make sense to him by taking care of practical tasks, by being there physically, but those actions aren't fulfilling her emotional or psychological needs. When his efforts seem to fall short, he might feel like he's constantly disappointing her, which over time can chip away at his sense of worth in the relationship. Eventually, if the expectations continue to go unmet, he may reach a breaking point where leaving feels like the only way to escape the pressure. But it's not just the woman's expectations that can create tension. Men, too, often have their own set of unspoken expectations. They expect their partner to understand their need for space, their desire for independence, or their struggle to open up emotionally. They expect their partner to give them the room to be who they are, to not demand constant validation or emotional expression when it's not in their nature. These expectations are equally important, yet they're often overlooked in the rush to fulfill the more visible, practical demands of the relationship. A man's internal expectations may revolve around his need to feel strong, capable, and competent. If he feels that his partner's expectations are too demanding or unrealistic, he might start to believe that he's failing in his role as a partner. He may feel emasculated or as if he's not living up to the image of who he thinks he should be. This pressure can manifest in ways that are difficult to pinpoint: withdrawal, irritability, or even outright disengagement. When these expectations are not acknowledged or respected, they can erode the foundation of the relationship, creating a sense of dissatisfaction that leads to distance. Unspoken expectations can also breed resentment. For a woman, the frustration of feeling that her needs are not being met can quickly turn into bitterness, which can in turn make the relationship feel more like a burden than a partnership. For a man, the feeling of being judged for not meeting these expectations can lead to feelings of inadequacy or resentment. In both cases, the lack of communication and understanding only compounds the issue. They may not even be aware of the expectations they are carrying until they begin to feel overwhelmed. By that time, it may be too late to bridge the gap without serious conversation and effort from both sides. The key to resolving these issues is recognizing that expectations need to be brought into the light. They need to be discussed, acknowledged, and recalibrated when necessary. Relationships thrive when both parties are able to express their needs clearly and without fear of judgment. It's only through this process of open communication that a couple can create mutual understanding and respect. When both people in a relationship feel like their expectations, whether they are emotional, practical, or personal, are heard and respected, it alleviates the pressure to conform to an image that may not be sustainable. Men leave women who care about them because they feel the weight of unspoken expectations. It's not a lack of love that drives them away. It's the feeling that no matter how hard they try, they can never truly meet the expectations that have been set for them, whether those expectations are clear or not. The only way to break this cycle is by removing the veil of assumption and having honest, empathetic conversations about what both partners need and expect. Until then, the distance will only grow wider, and the love will be overshadowed by the pressure of unspoken demands. One of the most significant emotional needs in any relationship, particularly for men, is the need for independence. It's a complex, often misunderstood desire that may seem counterintuitive to someone who is deeply invested in caring for their partner. But the truth is, men need to feel that they have the space to be themselves, to make their own decisions, and to navigate life on their own terms. When that independence is threatened or eroded, no matter how much love or care is being given, it can lead to withdrawal or ultimately a decision to leave. For many men, independence is not just about being free to make choices. It's about their ability to define their own identity, their purpose, and their role in the relationship. But when a man feels that his partner is constantly stepping in, fixing things, or telling him what to do, he may start to feel diminished. He may begin to believe that he's no longer seen as a capable individual, but rather as someone who needs constant supervision or direction. In these situations, what might feel like caring to one person may feel like a suffocating control to the other. Independence also speaks to the man's need to preserve his sense of autonomy, a fundamental aspect of his self-worth. Men often derive a great deal of pride and satisfaction from feeling that they can solve problems, handle challenges, and carve out their own path. It's not about rejecting help or love, it's about maintaining the ability to do things on their own, to take responsibility for their own lives. When that autonomy is undermined, even unintentionally, it can trigger a feeling of helplessness or inadequacy. This doesn't just affect his confidence, it affects the way he views the relationship. The more he feels like he's losing control over his own life, the more likely he is to distance himself. He might leave because he feels like he's being forced into a mold that doesn't fit, or because he fears that his independence will continue to be stripped away. Men often don't communicate this need for independence as clearly as women might expect. It's not that they don't need the connection or support, it's that their need for space is deeply tied to their sense of identity. The challenge arises when their partner doesn't understand the need for space, interpreting it as disinterest or emotional withdrawal. But in reality, it's a coping mechanism, a way of preserving their sense of self. The more a man is pressured to conform or to lean on his partner for constant validation or support, the more likely he is to pull back. The need for independence is also linked to a man's emotional strength. He wants to feel like he is not just a passive participant in his own life, but an active creator of his destiny. When he feels empowered to make his own decisions, to pursue his goals and passions, he feels confident and secure. But when that autonomy is compromised, it can lead to feelings of frustration or resentment. These emotions don't always manifest in ways that are easy to understand. A man might withdraw or become less emotionally available, and his partner might interpret this as a lack of love or interest. However, what's actually happening is that the man is trying to preserve the space he needs to feel in control of his own life. The issue becomes even more complicated when a man's desire for independence is met with resistance or misunderstanding. If a partner continuously pushes for more connection, more emotional sharing, or more joint decision-making, the man might begin to feel that he's losing his individuality. He might fear that in trying to be a supportive partner, he's being forced to merge his identity with someone else's vision. For many men, this sense of merging is a threat to their independence, and when it becomes overwhelming, they may start to retreat. They may not even realize that they're retreating into themselves as a way to protect their independence. The retreat can look like emotional withdrawal, disengagement, or even physical distance, but at its core, it's a plea for the freedom to maintain a sense of self. This dynamic is rooted in childhood experiences. Men are often socialized to be self-reliant and independent, and these values are ingrained from a young age. They may have grown up learning that asking for help or relying on others is a sign of weakness. As a result, the need for independence can be a deeply ingrained part of their identity, one that they may not even recognize until it feels threatened. A critical part of navigating this dynamic is recognizing that space doesn't mean absence, and independence doesn't mean detachment. Men need room to breathe, to think, to process their emotions on their own terms. This isn't about rejecting love or intimacy, it's about having the autonomy to make decisions, to grow, and to evolve in the relationship. When a partner can understand and respect this need for independence, it allows the man to feel secure in the relationship without feeling like he's losing himself. Men leave relationships when they feel that their need for independence is constantly being overlooked or undervalued. It's not a rejection of the relationship, it's a desire to preserve their identity and emotional strength. To make a relationship work, both partners must understand and respect each other's need for space and freedom. When that space is honored, when both people feel free to grow individually and together, the relationship becomes a true partnership. It's in this balance of independence and connection that the relationship thrives. Trust and emotional security are the cornerstones of any lasting relationship, and yet they are also some of the most fragile aspects of love. For men, the need for trust is particularly important in how they navigate their connection with their partner. When a man feels that trust is being compromised, whether through doubt, insecurity, or a perceived lack of faith in his character, it can lead to emotional withdrawal and eventually a desire to leave. The irony is that even though men deeply value loyalty and emotional security, they often have a different way of experiencing and expressing these needs, which can lead to miscommunication and frustration. The first key to understanding this dynamic is realizing that men often carry a deep-seated fear of being judged or misunderstood in their relationships. Men are frequently conditioned to hide vulnerability or weakness, to present themselves as strong, reliable, and capable. When that image is threatened, whether through criticism or a lack of trust, it can erode their emotional security. The sense that their partner no longer believes in them, whether it's doubting their intentions, their actions, or their commitment, hits at the core of their self-worth. It's not just about the specific situation, it's about the feeling that the foundation of the relationship is shaky. When trust starts to falter, even in small ways, it creates an emotional rift that may not be immediately visible. The man might not outwardly express his concern, but internally he begins to question the stability of the relationship. He starts to wonder if his partner truly values him for who he is, or if she's only with him under certain conditions or expectations. This feeling of being scrutinized, being doubted, or being taken for granted can lead to anxiety and stress, which are often difficult for men to process openly. Rather than confronting these feelings head-on, many men choose to withdraw, distancing themselves emotionally to protect their sense of self and their peace of mind. They may begin to retreat into themselves, not because they don't love their partner, but because they fear that their emotional security is being threatened. Another critical aspect of this issue is how men handle vulnerability in relationships. Men are often taught to protect their vulnerability, to mask their emotions or vulnerabilities with strength, and to never show uncertainty. As a result, when they feel that their partner no longer trusts them, or when they feel questioned about their integrity or loyalty, it activates their defenses. This is not necessarily a sign of guilt or wrongdoing. It's a natural response to feeling emotionally cornered. Rather than expressing their hurt or frustration, they might shut down, become defensive, or pull away in silence. The more they feel that their partner's trust is slipping, the more they feel the need to escape the emotional pressure. The paradox here is that the more a man feels his trust is being questioned, the more likely he is to distance himself, believing that withdrawal is the best way to avoid confrontation and preserve his dignity. Men often struggle with insecurity that arises from a lack of emotional validation. It's not that they don't want love, affection, or reassurance, it's that they are typically less vocal about needing it. Men might not always ask for reassurance in the way women might expect, but the absence of trust and validation can have the same emotional toll. If a man feels that his efforts are constantly in question, or that his loyalty or commitment is being doubted, he can start to feel invisible, unappreciated, and even inadequate. This sense of emotional invisibility can prompt a man to withdraw further, creating an emotional distance that only grows over time. If the lack of trust continues, it can lead to a feeling of emotional abandonment, which often results in the decision to leave. Trust is not only built through grand gestures, but through small, everyday actions that create a sense of security. Men value consistency and reliability in their relationships, and they feel safe when they know their partner is emotionally steady. When trust is broken, even in minor ways such as through inconsistency, dishonesty, or a lack of transparency, it shakes the foundation of the relationship. These small breaches accumulate over time, creating an emotional landscape that feels unstable. Men may not always express the hurt caused by these breaches directly, but over time, it builds a wall of emotional distance between them and their partner. They begin to feel that the relationship is no longer a safe space, and the pressure of maintaining something that feels fragile or broken becomes overwhelming. A man leaving a relationship due to a lack of trust isn't always about betrayal or infidelity. It's often about the erosion of emotional safety, the slow but steady feeling that he cannot be himself, that he is being watched or scrutinized in ways that make him feel unsupported or unloved. When men feel like they can no longer be emotionally secure or open, they often make the painful decision to leave, not because they want to, but because they fear that staying will continue to compromise their emotional well-being. To prevent this breakdown of trust, it's essential to cultivate open communication, honesty, and consistent emotional validation. For a man to feel emotionally secure, he needs to know that his integrity is respected and that his feelings are valued. This trust isn't built in a moment, but over time, through mutual understanding and genuine support. When trust is strong, a man feels confident in his ability to face challenges within the relationship, knowing that he can rely on his partner for emotional support without fear of judgment or doubt. But when that trust is fractured, even in small ways, it can become the driving force that leads to emotional distance and ultimately a decision to leave. The key is creating an environment of safety and understanding where both partners feel supported and validated, free to express their true selves without fear of losing trust. When a man pulls away from a woman who cares deeply for him, one of the often overlooked factors is the overwhelming emotional toll of being in a relationship where his feelings, needs, or desires are not truly understood or respected. This emotional disconnect can happen in ways that are subtle but powerful. Men, especially those who have been taught to suppress vulnerability or not to express their emotions openly, tend to internalize their struggles. They may feel unheard, misinterpreted, or even invisible when they try to communicate their needs, and as a result, they start to withdraw. They don't pull away because they no longer care about their partner, but because they feel like they are being forced to carry a heavy emotional burden alone. The more they feel misunderstood or overlooked, the more likely they are to emotionally retreat, which may eventually lead to them leaving the relationship altogether. In many cases, a man may feel that his partner is not fully aware of his emotional world, or that his needs are simply not being met in ways that resonate with him. This emotional distance can arise from a lack of emotional communication or misalignment between what he needs and how he expresses those needs. Men often struggle with articulating emotions such as sadness, fear, or frustration. It's not that they don't experience these emotions, rather, they often find it difficult to communicate them in a way that others can easily understand. Women, by contrast, are often more attuned to the emotional climate of a relationship and may interpret a man's silence, for example, as disinterest or detachment. However, for a man, this silence is often a way of processing emotions, a form of self-preservation, or an attempt to make sense of his own feelings without burdening his partner with his emotional turmoil. When the woman in the relationship senses this emotional withdrawal, it can create a cycle of misunderstanding. She might try harder to engage him, to reach out, to offer more care and support, but the man may see this as an intrusion into his space. Instead of feeling supported, he may feel that his emotional boundaries are being violated, which only pushes him further away. What's even more painful is that in these situations, the man might feel like he's failing to live up to the expectations of the relationship. The more the woman reaches out, the more he may feel like he is disappointing her by not being able to meet her emotional needs in the way she hopes. In turn, he becomes frustrated with himself, and his emotional reserves become depleted, which ultimately causes him to distance himself even more. This emotional exhaustion often manifests when a man feels that he is constantly giving of himself without feeling reciprocated in a way that truly matters to him. His love language may not be based on words of affirmation, but on acts of service or quality time, for example. If his efforts to show love through these actions are not recognized or appreciated in the way that he expects, it can lead to feelings of resentment. What may seem like a small oversight to his partner, perhaps failing to acknowledge a gesture he made, can feel like a significant emotional slight to him. In these moments, he may retreat, not because he wants to shut his partner out, but because he feels unappreciated and invisible. Over time, this emotional dissonance builds up, causing him to feel isolated and emotionally drained. If the cycle of emotional disconnect continues, the man may come to the conclusion that leaving the relationship is the only way to stop the emotional drain and protect his mental well-being. A key aspect of this disconnect also comes from a man's desire to maintain control over his emotional life. When he feels that his emotional needs are constantly being dictated by someone else, he may feel powerless. Men generally prefer to control the pace and direction of their emotional expression. When they are in relationships where their feelings are constantly being shaped by someone else's needs or expectations, they can begin to feel like they are losing themselves. They may start to wonder whether their emotional needs, desires, and boundaries matter to their partner at all. This creates an emotional imbalance where the man feels as though he is being asked to perform a role that doesn't align with who he truly is. The longer he feels this imbalance, the more likely he is to retreat, becoming more distant and possibly even leaving, believing that it's the only way to regain control over his emotional space. Men often find it difficult to express vulnerability, especially when they feel overwhelmed by the emotional intensity of the relationship. Vulnerability is typically seen as a weakness in many cultures, and men conditioned by societal norms struggle with the idea of being vulnerable, especially in the presence of someone they care about. When they do express vulnerability, they risk feeling judged or unappreciated, which can reinforce their desire to withdraw. This vulnerability also ties into the broader fear of being emotionally exposed or rejected, which is why men often retreat when they feel that the emotional demands placed on them are too great. They might feel that if they express their true emotions, they will not be met with the understanding or support they need. As a result, they create emotional walls to shield themselves from further hurt, and these walls only grow taller the more they are misunderstood. The cumulative effect of feeling misunderstood, emotionally drained, and disconnected can push a man to a breaking point where he feels that leaving the relationship is his only option for emotional survival. It's not a decision based on a lack of love or care, but rather on the belief that staying in the relationship will only lead to more pain, frustration, and emotional exhaustion. The emotional toll of constantly trying to meet expectations without feeling truly understood or validated becomes too much for him to bear. In these cases, leaving may feel like the only way for him to preserve his mental health, regain a sense of self, and find the space he needs to heal.